And when we went, we made 6 runs that night, and we went looking to see if we could, in one way or another, cover for a helicopter to come in and pick up our pilot. And we just got the bejesus shot out of us. And if you measured it by color, I would tell you that we saw streaks of yellow and red. We saw a lot of orange. The pilot in front of me's plane was outlined with flak.
A former Navy carrier pilot who flew missions over North Vietnam describes what it was like day to day, bombing enemy territory, and how he and his brother pilots handled the inevitable, wearying effects of fear.
This was the first place in the country to honor Korean War dead. And it also was the first place to have those men and women killed in Vietnam memorialized. So in all, there are nearly 12,000 souls memorialized out there, brave men and women who died in combat. And unfortunately, there is room to add names.
And we get a special up-close look at the Virginia War Memorial, the host and sponsor of the Mighty Pen Project and these podcasts, when I sit down with Pam Seay, president of the Virginia War Memorial Foundation. Hello, welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families, in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. Jim Dyke, the author of our first story today, was a Navy jet pilot based on a carrier off the coast of Vietnam. Every mission, as he climbed into the cockpit, Jim took the measure of himself on the spectrum of fear: good days, middle days, and bad days. Our second story was written by one of our favorite Mighty Pen students, Marine Robert Waldroff, who's passed away. I thought Robert's story of faith and service was a perfect match for us to meet Pam Seay, head of the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, to hear Pam's thoughts and insights on this special place of memoriam for warriors who fell in battle. Let's listen first to Alpha Male, performed by Harry Kollatz. Then I'll talk with author Jim Dyke.
In October 1965, our squadron left Alameda Air Base. We sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge, destination Vietnam. Charlie Clydesdale, Mike Arns, and I stood at the bow. We looked down from the bridge onto a gray flight deck with CVA 19 painted between the two catapult tracks. Mike said, "I'm afraid I will die in Vietnam." Until that moment, I had never admitted that the orders to combat in Vietnam scared me. Fear was not an emotion a pilot admitted having. On my first mission, I began to understand that flying in combat was an exercise in managing fear. Some days a pilot is good at it. No matter the target, you're up to the challenge. The catapult shot was fun. You climbed to 7,500 feet above the target, rolled over on your back, pulled the nose to a 30-degree or 45-degree dive, dropped your bombs at exactly 3,500 feet, and pulled out of your dive above 1,500. Everything happened in slow motion, and you're fully in control. You don't notice the puffs of flak. You don't feel the bounce of your fuselage as the bombs you dropped explode. You don't mind making 6 dives on the same target. You turned at the bow of the ship at 500 feet, turned in at the stern, and saw the guiding light of the meatball. You landed aboard the carrier just as you were trained to do. On bad days, you left the flight briefing with a dry mouth. Taxiing the jet to the catapult was a challenge. After the catapult shot, you looked to find the flight leader and made a mess of joining the formation. Rolling in on the target, every bump must have meant your aircraft had been hit. You couldn't find the altimeter, so you dropped your bombs high. They hit short or low, and each run is a terror. The landing was made, but it was sloppy, and you were soaked with sweat. Most days were somewhere in the middle. The good days were rare. The bad days were rare. All of this was very personal. The pilot's ready room was full of pilots who did not share their feelings. On the day of our first Alpha strike, I was on the good side of the fear continuum. An Alpha strike was more than a regular bombing mission. A regular mission was 2 or 4 aircraft dropping ordnance on a target. The target for an Alpha was a high priority target. The intelligence officer told us about our first Alpha strike. We were to bomb Vin. He said, "Sources have identified a concentration of troops and vehicles and ground-to-air weapons. We think the defense will be strong, with all calibers of anti-aircraft fire." We received our tactics briefing. The F-8s were to roll in first to provide flak suppression so we and our Navy A-4s could more safely climb to 7,500 feet, roll in, and drop our bombs. Our 20 aircraft come from A-4 Skyhawk squadrons aboard the USS Hancock. I was the 20th and last jet to roll in on each of the 6 bombing runs. My regular flight leader, Lieutenant Commander Bill Eisenhower, called Ike, was number 19. The Tonkin Gulf was smooth that morning. The sky, puffy only with little clouds, was ready to greet me. The launch was normal. Run the power to 100%, check the gauges, salute the launch officer, put my right hand at my crotch, left hand locks the throttle at full, lean back against the seat and take the catapult shot, catching the control stick as it comes back toward my crotch. Gear up and look for Ike. Just as briefed. Number 1 was made a sweeping right turn so all the rest of us could catch up and slide gracefully into our places in the formation. We completed the turn and headed for the coast. I looked across the beach. Great day for the sand and water. Ike's aircraft began to gyrate wildly. He radioed, I'm hit, then turned away from the coast. The flight leader ordered, 20, take Ike back to the ship. I caught Ike as he turned above our carrier. Using hand signals, I informed Ike I was going to inspect his aircraft. I slid left and under. His wings looked good. I pulled back on the power and eased aft. The fuselage had no damage. I gave Ike a thumbs up. No damage to his plane. Taking the lead, I led Ike down to the meatball. He landed fine. Once on board the carrier, the ground crew inspected Ike's plane. A close look at his cockpit revealed a .45 caliber slug in the parachute pack. Ike had discharged his sidearm in the cockpit. No announcement was made about what happened. We all just chalked it up to bad luck and let it slide. I didn't ask, but I suspect Ike was having a bad day on the continuum of fear. I flew many missions, both night and day. I flew in rotten weather, through flak and SAMs. I was the duty officer monitoring another Alpha strike when one of our pilots, Lieutenant Paul Galante, was shot down and captured. Paul stayed a guest of the North Vietnamese for 6 years at Hanoi Hilton. On the day of my second Alpha strike, I found myself on the bad side of the fear continuum. We were only days from leaving Vietnam and coming home. The Alpha strike was to bomb the airfield north of Hanoi. I was to be the 24th aircraft over the target. The intelligence briefing told us to expect lots of flak as we headed north past Hainan Island. Lots more flak as we winged west on our way into the target. Then plenty of SAMs on the way in and out. The weather briefing was even worse. Forecasts for less than 1,000-foot ceiling on takeoff, unknown ceiling on crossing north of Haiphong, and more unknown ceiling over the target 60 miles inland. Since the exit route was just backtracking, the weather and defenses were to be the same on the way in and out. The ceiling ended up being lower than predicted. The flight turned left toward Hanoi. There, we found the cloud ceiling even lower. The leader turned away from the coast. I had to descend to allow the other 23 aircraft to pass in front of me. The aircraft shook. Stall warning. I released the pressure and leveled the wings, and in that crazy moment, I lost sight of the flight. My circumstances were: first, near the Chinese coast; second, east of the very heavily fortified North Vietnamese coast; and last, I was flying alone. I climbed to 500 feet, turned a bit west of south, and found the coast, followed it southward, and confessed over the radio to the flight leader that I had lost sight of the flight. I reported my altitude and heading. I finally felt safe when the Hancock's radar identified me and guided me through the clouds until I could rejoin the flight. 24 was back where I belonged. I landed safely I took my ass chewing from the flight leader. I hadn't handled my fear very well that mission. From that day to this, I cannot adequately express how embarrassed a pilot is when he is lost, scared, and alone. Days later, our last before heading home, our commanding officer wrote the names of our flight leaders on the blackboard. Each flight leader needs a wingman. This mission, our last Alpha strike, was to bomb the airfield between Hanoi and the Chinese border. I told myself that fear was not an emotion I, a Navy jet bomber pilot, could afford. But I was scared, frozen in my ready room chair. Slowly, the wingman spots were filled. Each time a volunteer sat, I wanted to get up. Finally, Lieutenant Commander Don Gregg filled the last spot, the one I should have stood for, with Ike. All went well until Ike and Don were between Hainan and Vietnam. Ike radioed that his plane was hit. He jettisoned his bombs and bomb racks. He banked back toward the carrier. Ike ejected southwest of Hainan. Cover was provided until the helicopter rescue plucked him out of the jungle. That night, I flew our squadron's next to last mission. We were feet dry south of Tan Hoa. The SAMs flew all around us. We dodged the missiles and dropped our bombs. Later that dark evening, Lieutenant Mike Arns flew our squadron's last mission. His aircraft caught fire as he took the catapult shot. He ejected just off the bow. The Hancock swerved to miss his downed A-4. Mike was back aboard the carrier less than 15 minutes later. He survived Vietnam. Lieutenant Charlie Clydesdale, after nearly 7 years as a prisoner of war, survived Vietnam. I survived Vietnam. I have seen Charlie and Mike often in the more than half-century years since Vietnam. I asked Mike if he remembered what he said as we sailed under the bridge. No, what did I say? I told him, I don't remember that. I wonder still, is my memory flawed, or do pilots never admit being scared?
That was Alpha Male, written by Jim Dyke, who's with me in the studio today. Jim, I'm going to jump to the end and work my way back to the beginning. The end meaning now. Now, you said at the beginning of that story, wonderful story, edge of my seat, fear was not an emotion a pilot admitted having. Now, here we are, these decades later. You have a rocket attached to your rear end. You're not flying over the DMC. You're not dodging SAMs and flak. But fear is an emotion a pilot does not admit. Did that have tendrils in your life after the military? Did you stay that guy? Are you still a pilot? Are you still reluctant to admit that you're fearful sometimes?
I don't think reluctant to admit it. I think over the course of time, you recognize it and can manage it, not necessarily better, but you can manage it because you know it's there. But no, you still have fear when your kids come home 2 hours after curfew, or when you've lost your wife at an airport. That kind of thing still creates a fear in you that you have to work with and overcome.
Yeah, but do you admit it?
I think now I can admit it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think now I can.
What changed?
Age, maturity. I lost John Wayne. Because remember, we're the John Wayne. You only have to fear yourself.
Right.
The Roosevelt quote. We had John Wayne who was flying leathernecks. Once you grow out of that and grow out of the fact that you are not up on the screen, that you're a human being walking through life with a whole bunch of other human beings who are facing the same things, I think you learn how to manage that stuff. And parenthood certainly does that.
Oh, I bet. Look, in private moments, okay, you're on the carrier. Just came back from a hairy mission. Sam's, flak, green beach balls in the air, right? The whole thing. You ever just take a pal aside and go, Jesus Christ? Do you ever? No, even in private.
No. Now, I called a friend after writing this, called a guy named R.G. Myers, who's an old buddy. Said, R.G., were you ever afraid on the carrier? He said, yeah, I was afraid. He said, but I never said anything to anybody else. I said, how did you know you were afraid? He said, when I fell asleep at night, my knuckles were tight around the bars of the bed. And I'd
Wow.
wake up and my hands were tired. I said, did you ever say anything to your roommate? Because he had Smokey Tolbert, who was a hero, was his roommate. He said, no, never said a word.
What would have happened if he'd come to you?
I think as a 22, 23-year-old, I guess I was, I think probably we could have had a conversation, but it would not have been the same conversation as two 80-year-olds would have today.
Yeah.
It would have been a more an RG, you got to get over it kind of conversation.
Suck it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Bad days, some. Good days, some. Middle, most. What were the middle days like?
The middle days were show up at the intelligence office, take your briefing, listen to it as best you could, realize that there may be the flak there that you expected or there may not be. Climb in the airplane, everything goes well, the plane captain waves you up, and everything goes fine, and you're kind of aware of everything. Your memory of that mission may never come back to you. The bad days you remember, the good days you remember. Those days, like the game that you played and you had two walks and kind of scuffed a ball.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Somebody else had a better day.
Yeah.
Somebody else had a worse day. You remember their days better than you remember your own.
absolutely,
Right, I got you.
Absolutely.
Okay, Ike, who discharges his sidearm in the cockpit. How did he do that? Why was fear a factor in that?
Ike wore an Air Force G suit, and the straps were open. And when he put on his weapon, he wore it over the top instead of wearing it as we did more on our hip. And so, at best we could recreate, he was able to catch the hammer
On the
and
strap.
and then brush it and discharge the weapon. Ike had a number of bad days. He was my flight leader for probably 80% of my flights. We were assigned that way.
Mhm.
And he had some days that were, I'm lost. He had some days that just didn't work well for him. And it's interesting. He spent a full career in the Navy, probably flew as many or more missions than any other naval aviator, because he went back 4 times. He went back 3 times. He had 4 cruises, all in the A4. I think he claims to have had the most hours of any pilot ever in the A4.
Wow.
So it wasn't that he was not a committed naval officer. It was that Ike had some days that were bad days. And this was very early on in Vietnam. This was his first cruise in combat too.
His name was Charlie Clydesdale.
Clydesdale.
Charlie Clydesdale. He catapult shoots off and he flames out or something. And what happened?
One of the bombs came off the rack and rotated and caught on the deck and tore the back half of his aircraft. The fire set. Every cat shot on a carrier is videoed. If you watch the video, you can see it happen. It was just amazing how good it was. And the aircraft went up in the air, but they were starting to shout immediately from the bridge, fire, fire, fire. He punched out. His feet got in the water about the same time as the helicopter got him.
Wow.
And they fetched him out and put him aft. And downstairs, he went to the flight surgeon to make sure he was okay, had a couple of drinks of brandy, and was back in the ready room.
All right, so that night,
Mhm.
comes up to you, says, Jim, did you see what happened today? I was scared shit. What would you say to him? Like, dude, don't tell me this. What would you do? Jim, come on, man. Have a heart.
Well, let me tell you what he really said to me.
Okay.
I was the ordnance officer. You son of a bitch! Why didn't you guys get the aircraft loaded right? I told you. You still haven't got it right. So no, had he come to me and said anything about being scared, we would just, I think by that time we were all on our way home. That was the last flight. I think we'd have all laughed and said it's over. He already had a date with the airlines. He flew a long career with the airlines. He knew he was getting out as soon as he got back to San Francisco. He made it through.
I mean, punching out 2 seconds off the deck, that must have been harrowing. You said lost, scared, and alone. Those are the worst for a pilot. Lost, scared, and alone. Of those 3, which is the worst?
Alone.
Walk me through that.
You're there, and while you are confident that you know exactly what you're doing, it's still nice to have your other pilots with you. Doesn't make any difference whether you're off a Hainan or whether you're over the Sierras. You're all alone, and you're not as confident as you were a minute ago.
Mm.
And you've got to start depending on your own skill and your own guile to get you through. I had an engine quit over the Sierras when I was flying the AD, the SPAD. At that spot, you're alone again. And you have to figure out how to get the engine started and how to fly it back home. Same sort of feeling.
When you said you were flight 24 over the target, now my understanding is that the guys in the back are the ones that caught it the worst. When you're flight 24 out of 24, is that an honor? Is that punishment? Is that just the luck of the draw? Why are you in the back? Because that's like where you put the people you don't like.
See, seniority. Ike was the most junior of the senior officers, if there's rank among senior officers. In general, the flight leaders were lieutenant commander and above. In general, the number 3 guys were lieutenants and below. Ike was the most junior flight leader. And so when you put the 2 A4 squadrons together, Ike was still most junior. So when we lined up, Ike and I would be tail end Charlie every single time. And Ike wasn't tail end Charlie. I was.
You were, because he's ahead of you.
And I was the most senior. This is silliness. There is no rank when you get down that low, but I was the most senior juniorist officer. So I was matched up with the junior senior officer.
Okay.
If any of that makes sense.
You lost me at hello.
Yeah, good.
Right.
And us cut all that.
Flak and SAMs. Flak comes in different sizes, different calibers. From what I understand, some of them look like red beach balls. Some look like green beach balls. Some are blue, some are yellow. And you know the caliber by the color of the tracer, correct?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm so busy flying the airplane, I'm not looking at colors.
Yeah.
When we lost our pilot, we went back in after him, and it was twilight. Now, I had seen flak a number of times from just puffs in the daylight. Just little mini clouds, little baby clouds that might be here just off your right ear or just off your left shoulder, and you see the puffs. But at twilight, you see the streaks and the color. And when we went, we made 6 runs that night, and we went looking to see if we could, in one way or another, cover for a helicopter to come in and pick up our pilot. And we just got the bejesus shot out of us. And if you measured it by color, I would tell you that we saw streaks of yellow and red. We saw a lot of orange. And I saw it below the pilot in front of me's plane was outlined with flak.
Wow.
And when we landed, he said, "Oh, God, are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah, but are you all right?" And he said, your plane was just plan viewed in flak. And I said, "So was yours." Neither one of us were hit.
And that's all you said. You said anything else, you walked away.
We walked away.
Before you said something.
We never said, "Are your underwear okay?" or anything like that.
We'll never discuss this again, right?
And we haven't.
Wow. Jim Dyke, great story and a great interview. Thank you, man.
Thank you. It's
Thank
always
you
good
for
to
your
see you.
service, and
Thank you.
take care, bro. Now our second story, Semper Fi, written by the late Robert Waldroff, read again by Harry Kollatz. Afterward, I'll talk about the Virginia War Memorial, its history and purpose, with War Memorial Foundation President Pam Seay.
The huge C-141 lumbered to a stop at Travis Air Force Base just outside San Francisco. The urgency of getting back to the States required enduring inside the hull of this flying monster for the 20-hour flight from Okinawa. The only seat available put me between 2 large trucks, returning for repairs. Must keep the war machine rolling. The doors opened, and I deplaned into a beautiful late May sunset. Hurrying through the terminal, the bus named Treasure Island Naval Base welcomed me aboard. Sore, tired, and needing sleep. Tomorrow promised a long day. Next morning, I walked to Quonset Hut 47. "Morning, Gunny. Here's my orders. Want to pick up Lieutenant Wood." "I'll get him, sir." I looked out the window at the magnificent Golden Gate Bridge framed in a cloudless sky and the dark blue waters of San Francisco Bay. So perfect it had to be a postcard. Soon the gunny reappeared pushing a casket. "Here he is, sir. Check the tag. Let's be sure we got the right one." The large white tag read, First Lieutenant Robert T. Wood, United States Marine Corps, killed in action, FB Rider, 13 May 70. That's him. Let's get him back on the truck. He's going home. The trip from Treasure Island Naval Base to the San Francisco airport didn't take long. Just 7 months ago, Woody and I were here, Marine second lieutenants, excitedly boarding our flight to the Western Pacific. Woody had orders to Vietnam, me, the Rock. We said goodbye in Okinawa. "Don't eat all the pogie bait, Wally. You're going to make a hell of a clerk typist." "Fuck you, Woody. Just don't kill all the Kong before I get there." Bob and I met at OCS in November 1968. We spent the next 12 months training to be Marine artillery officers. We did everything together. 10 weeks of OCS, 25 weeks of TBS, and 15 weeks of artillery school at Fort Sill. His wife Shirley and my wife Ann got to be good friends. Our daughters were born 7 months apart. Marines, blood brothers, best friends. At the airport, we were flagged through to the tarmac to load the casket on the flight to Arlington, Texas. I wore my summer C's, drawing lots of attention in the plane. I overheard a guy telling his wife, "See that Marine? He's only a lieutenant and doesn't have a clue what he's in for." The flight took a couple hours. After everyone exited, I deplaned and got on the luggage cart with the casket. Driving to the terminal to meet the hearse, the flag kept flapping in the wind. I held it down as best I could, hoping it wouldn't fly off. The hearse drove to the back of the funeral home where Shirley and Mr. and Mrs. Wood waited. I hopped out, introduced myself to the funeral director, shook hands with Mr. and Mrs. Wood, and hugged Shirley. She had begged the Red Cross to get the Corps to let me escort Bob home, which they accommodated, though I had just received orders to Vietnam. "Oh, Bob," Shirley said, "thank you so much. I'm totally lost. It wasn't supposed to be this way." The Woods, grim-faced, looked at me with disdain. "What time is the memorial service?" I asked. Mrs. Wood said, 7. "We need to get things set up. We'll see you later." "Come on," said Shirley. "I'll take you to the hotel to check in. But let's go see Lisa. She's already 9 months old." The crowd arrived early and filled the chapel. An open casket service. I stood behind the casket at parade rest, staring at my friend. He looked good in blues. Soon, everybody passed by, paying respects. When Shirley got close, she screamed, "It's not him! They've made a mistake!" She grabbed her father and broke down. The Woods came next. Mr. Wood looked glassy-eyed, and Mrs. Wood was in a trance. They got next to the casket, peered in, and wouldn't move. Finally, the director led them away. I stayed stiff, trying not to move, thinking I never trained for this. We moved into the reception hall, talking quietly. From my right came Mr. Wood, pointing a finger. "Your goddamn Marine Corps killed my boy!" Before I answered, he slurred, "Go to hell!" Turned and left. No one saw him for 3 days. Mrs. Wood said, "Forgive him. He's still bleeding. Bob was his favorite. I'm healing. Bob came to my bed last week. He hugged me and whispered, 'Don't worry, Mama. I have no pain and I'm safe. I need to leave now and rest for tomorrow's ceremony. See you there.'" Before everyone left, I introduced myself to the major in charge of the honor guard. "I'll pick you up at 1000 and go to the cemetery and get snapped in. You don't have to do much," said the major. "Sir, how did he die?" Well, he was in the mountains calling in artillery on top of an IOD tower about 0100 in a horrible thunderstorm. Charlie was coming in through the Kazan Valley using the storm for cover. Lightning hit his landline, traveled up the tower, and fried his brain. No shit. Lightning? Dangerous place, Lieutenant. Lots of ways to buy some land. Shirley and I met for breakfast before the funeral. We had it all planned. He'd finish his commitment at Pendleton. We'd move back to Sherman Oaks. We'd pick up where we left off. He really loved working for Mobil. His Texas veins flowed with oil. Why'd he have to be a Marine? They always get killed. Lisa and I are alone. I need a job. We've got 500 in savings. I just don't know where to start. Why did he leave us? You know the answer. He loved being a Marine and felt a duty to protect America. Nothing could stop him. He was fearless. He never thought he would get killed. He loved you. I know. Wish we could start over. You know, Ann and I will do whatever we can to help you. Woody and I vowed that to each other. I'll try to stop over on my way home from Vietnam. We arrived at the cemetery at 1100. I hugged Shirley and walked over to the major. Not complicated, Lieutenant. Stand with the color guard. When the pastor's done and we play taps, walk the two flags to Shirley and Mrs. Wood, kneel, hand them the flags, and tell them, on behalf of the President of the United States, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's service to country and Corps. Questions? No, sir. I got it. Soon things started. There was a huge crowd. The preacher finished his remarks, taps, and the 21-gun salute finished. I marched over to Bob's family with the folded flags, knelt, and handed over each one. Shirley, fragile as a flower, hugged her flag, sobbing quietly. Mrs. Wood didn't touch her flag, just stared at the casket. I got up, paid respects to each family member, cut a tight salute, choked up, and walked back quickly to the color guard. Before turning around, I chided my sorry ass. Suck it up, you goddamn wuss. Do not let these people see a Marine cry. You owe it to Woody. The crowd slowly thinned out. I went to Shirley and Lisa. Remember, anything, anytime, just get a hold of me. We'll get through this. She grabbed my hand. Be careful. Promise you won't get hurt. I can't lose you too. Take good care of Lisa. Bob loved her. See you soon. After it all ended, Bob's brothers drove me to the airport to catch my flight to LA to spend 2 days with my parents, Ann, and my 3-month-old daughter, Peyton, whom I'd never seen. They dropped me off at the curb of United Airlines. Thanks, guys. Your brother died a hero. Be proud of him. Stay in touch. My homecoming included lots of small talk and ended before it started. I learned to change a diaper, played with Peyton, and we all avoided talking about the elephant in the room. Except for Peyton. We'd been through the goodbye routine 7 months ago and were not eager to repeat the ritual. This time, I had orders for Nam, and Woody was dead. We got into my father's car for the short ride to El Toro, where I waited availability for a flight to Vietnam. After navigating the freeways, we pulled up to the TOQ. Knowing the drill by heart, I got out of the car, grabbed my bag, quickly kissed Ann, my mother, sweet Peyton, and shook my old man's hand. Don't worry, I'll be home soon. They drove off. I waved goodbye to the most important people in my life. After checking in, I got my key, walked down a long hallway, unlocked the door, entered the small, lonely room and dropped my bag. Grabbing a beer from the fridge, I collapsed in a chair and stared at a blank gray wall, waiting for the phone to ring.
That was Semper Fi, read movingly by Harry Kollatz. I'm joined in the studio today by Pam Seay, president of the Virginia War Memorial Foundation. Our listeners probably know that Robert Waldorf passed away 2 years ago, and I felt that today's story, written by Bob Semper Fi, was a beautiful emblem for what the War Memorial stands for and what Pam Seay's work is dedicated to, and that is the remembrance of service, sacrifice, duty to country. And I couldn't think of anybody better to talk to us about what Semper Fi exemplifies than Pam Seay. And Pam, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, David.
The first thing I suppose we should establish is context. Talk to us about the Virginia War Memorial, the foundation that supports that War Memorial, and your role in all this.
The Virginia War Memorial is a state agency. It has been authorized since 1950, so next year is actually the 75th anniversary of the memorial, which I think everyone who's been here and been to any other state memorials would agree. This is the best of its type in the country. The Virginia War Memorial Foundation is the 501c3 independent nonprofit that brings private money to the table to make things like this podcast, the Mighty Pen Project, the ceremonies that we do, the programs that we offer. It's the foundation that makes those things possible.
I live a mile from the War Memorial. I'm here all the time, and if I'm not here, I drive by it. And I underscore what you just said. I've been in a lot of other states' war memorials. The beautiful one out in Hawaii comes to mind. This place, this facility, in the last couple of years, first of all, doubled in size. If you can, give us a quick verbal tour of what this place is. And for those folks who have seen this, then you know the location is extraordinary. We've got up on a bluff right above the James River, staring over the old Tredegar Iron Works where the Civil War cannon factories were. It's an absolutely stunning location, and the building is a marvel. And this is your place. So tell us your thoughts on it.
The memorial was dedicated on Leap Day, February 29th, 1956. It was a long time in the making. It was authorized in 1950, but as is typical in Virginia, it was not a slam dunk. There were arguments, as there are today, between preservationists and development.
I got to jump in. You know that old joke. How many Virginians does it take to change a light bulb? 4. 1 to change a light bulb, 3 to talk about how good that old one was.
Well, it was sort of like that, but it also was Virginia politics, which are also unique to this state because we have governors who can only be governors for 4 years. They have one chance to put in their own budget. The next governor gets to change it. And the public, there was a huge outcry from the public spending this kind of money after the war when there was such a need for things like hospitals, libraries. And to be honest, the World War I memorial, the Carillon, did not set a great example. That was a troubled monument in the making. So when this place finally opened, we had been in and out of Korea. So what began as a vision to memorialize the men and women who died in combat in World War II became also the same thing for those killed in the Korean conflict. And because this place was so long in the making, the design was already established, the property already secured, this was the first place in the country to honor Korean war dead. And it also was the first place to have those men and women killed in Vietnam memorialized because of all that.
Now there's a whole new wing for the war on terror.
For the global war on terrorism.
Yeah.
So in all, there are nearly 12,000 souls memorialized out there, brave men and women who died in combat. And unfortunately, there is room to add names.
And their names are etched on these beautiful, compelling, thick glass walls.
And granite.
And granite.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it is a stunning testimony to their sacrifice.
So through the years, the memorial grew and became an education center. So today we do documentaries, we do major exhibitions, we have school groups come in. I would feel like our education focus is probably K to 100, K to gray. It is that makes this a living memorial. It is no longer a static recitation of names etched in granite and glass.
And the Mighty Pen has a place in that because it's become sort of the spear point of your outreach programs. Yeah?
The Mighty Pen program, now in its 10th year, is almost it is the living mission because our mission is to preserve the stories of those who made the ultimate sacrifice. And that story we just heard. Where else would that story be preserved? Our mission is also to honor all veterans and all active military. And so for the writers who participate in the Mighty Pen Project, we are honoring them. We are honoring their memories. We are honoring the space they need to tell those stories. And then the third pillar of our mission is to inspire love of country through education. And I think that is probably our most important audience is the non-veteran audience. For non-veterans to hear stories like this and to understand that to say thank you for your service, that's a good thing to do. But understanding what that service means and the sacrifice that it puts on those people who are serving, but also their families.
Yeah.
So the Mighty Pen Project is our mission incarnate.
And as the founder of the Mighty Pen, thank you for that lovely testimony. There's a line in Semper Fi when Bob is speaking to Shirley, the newly minted widow, and she asks him, why did it happen? And he says, he loved being a Marine. He was fearless. He felt the duty to protect his nation, and he loved you. And I thought those 4 lines summed up this place, that story, your work, my work. But every time I go anywhere near Marines, I ask this question. What is it about Marines? Now, you work with them, I work with them, but every time I have a story by or about Marines, it's always about being a Marine. Your thoughts on that?
I think it smacks of that concept of the dignity of identity. And I don't know that Marines necessarily identify more with being a Marine than a Ranger identifies with being a Ranger, than Special Ops identifies with Special Ops. But there is something about the dignity of identity, which is why it is so important that all of those names are actually named. It is a way to add a dimension to your life.
Yeah. We in the Mighty Pen work with people who served 60 years ago. And the memory that they write for the program and that they articulate into these microphones, it's like it happened this morning.
I know when I hear them. I am the daughter of a World War II veteran. He was at the Battle of the Bulge. I am the niece of a Pearl Harbor survivor. It is important that we give all of those veterans a chance to get that stuff out of their head and onto paper. And you can't ever normalize combat. How do you normalize the Battle of the Bulge experience? But for those people who survive other traumas as well, short of normalizing it, you can get it out. And I think that's what your class does. It gives people a chance to get it out of their head, at least partly. But I also think there's a beauty, a de-stinging, if that's a word, of hearing somebody else read the words. You can't normalize it, but when someone else says the words back to you, I do think it takes some of the hurt out. And if that World War II generation, who we all know never talked about that stuff, if they could have, if they had, would they have possibly been helped? I don't know. But I do think that this program helps these people, and it helps those of us who hear the words.
I go back to something you said a moment ago, Pam, about identity. My lengthy experience working with veterans in this context is that that's a powerful notion to them, because listeners of this podcast have heard veteran after veteran say, I never told anybody this story, David, until I wrote it for you or wrote it for this class. And not just this podcast, but across the country, veterans who are suffered often so quietly. And once they can, I remember Bob's, the author of this story. We had a memorial for him here at the War Memorial. You were there. And his wife, Ann, came up to me afterwards and she said, y'all said things about Bob, married him 50 years. And she said, I heard things about Bob I never knew. And I find that giving veterans the platform to express that identity, this is who I was, this is who I became,
Right.
and know me by these things, because it's there, but they haven't allowed themselves to be known by these acts, by these adventures and events. And what the War Memorial does for them by memorializing the sacrifice, and what the Mighty Pen does on behalf of the War Memorial, is giving them that identity in a community of like-minded men and women. It reasserts their pride and takes away, I think, a great deal of the trauma, and even sometimes some of what they might consider shame.
Well, I would say that the hallmark of the Mighty Pen Project is that it is a judgment-free environment. And I think all of the things that we do here at the Memorial for veterans to encourage artistic endeavors, not just literary arts, but performance arts
Yeah.
and visual arts and movement arts. I think we tend to think of veterans in some monolithic way, that they are all the same, and they are very often pawns in a political back and forth thing that goes on. But I do think it's art that allows each of us to be unique. Only
Preach.
one person could have written that story. And truly, Harry Kollatz is an artist. Only one person could have read it exactly that way.
Yeah, yeah. I can only say preach and thank you for your support of me
Huh?
personally, the support of the Mighty Pen, the work you do for this War Memorial. You run a big machine here, and it runs flawlessly, and I'm proud to be part of it. At the end of every one of my podcasts, you hear me say, it's an honor. Well, it's an honor to be dealing with these voices and these stories, but I say to you, it's an honor to work with this organization and for the War Memorial. And I thank you for that honor.
Well, thank you for sharing it with me, because I feel the same way.
Mic drop. The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen podcast. It is and will remain an honor.